We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Well, believe it or not, this day here at Cappers got started last spring when the CEO invited the first gentleman and me over to tour Cappers. And then I learned that Cappers was getting ready to celebrate their 100th year anniversary. And then I learned that Rotary World Polio Day was the same day as our club meeting. So, welcome. I'm Joni Underwood, President. We do have a lot of guests. Roger will introduce them a little bit later, but a few that I want to call to your attention is Linda Hall, who's the wife of Mike Hall, one of our speakers today. You get to stand up, Linda, and stay standing. Stay standing. And then our exchange student, Angelelle, that we all know. And last and definitely not least is the first gentleman and the right-hand person that keeps me sane, Roger. I'd like to introduce to you now Roger Eshelman, who is the MC for today's meeting, and he gave me strict instructions to only introduce him as past president and polio chair and MC. Now, he has done everything else I've asked him to do. And so I'm going to follow his instructions. Right there.
Welcome to World Polio Day. We're excited everyone's here, and we have a lot of interesting and fun things to do. I'm going to name some special guests, and we'll hear from a few of them later as well. First, Jenna Lee Randall, president of the Topeka South Rotary Club. Yay, Jenna Lee, we love you. At the table, you'll hear from him a bit, is Larry Lunsford, aide to the Rotary International president. Larry, we're glad you're here. Jason Lieb and his wife Jackie are special guests. We'll hear from Jason in a little bit too. Jason's the district governor. We welcome our own past district governor, past president Blanche Parks. South Rotarian, past president and district governor-elect Farron Barr. Are there any other guests that we have missed? All right, thank you so much. We're going to welcome right off the bat City Councilwoman Karen Hiller. Most of you already know and admire Karen greatly. If you don't know her, you'll learn to admire her. She is with us today to read a special proclamation from the city.
Thank you, Roger. I'm here today on behalf of Mayor de la Isla, and I will simply read the city proclamation for today. Whereas Rotary International, founded on February 23rd, 1905 in Chicago, Illinois, USA, is the world's first and one of the largest nonprofit service organizations. And whereas the Rotary motto, service above self, inspires members to provide humanitarian service, encourage high ethical standards, and promote goodwill and peace in the world. And whereas Rotary in 1985 launched Polio Plus and helped to establish the global polio eradication initiative, which today includes the World Health Organization, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, UNICEF, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to immunize the children of the world against polio. And whereas polio cases have dropped by 99.9% since 1988, and the world stands on the threshold of eradicating the disease, and whereas to date, Rotary has contributed countless volunteer hours to the protection of more than 2.5 billion children in 122 countries, and the Topeka Rotary Club's members have contributed over $200,000 of the total Rotary contribution of more than US 1.9 billion. And whereas Rotary is working to raise an additional $50 million per year, which would be further leveraged for maximum impact by an additional $100 million annual from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Whereas in addition, Rotary has played a major role in decisions by donor governments to contribute more than $8 billion to the effort. Now, therefore, I, Michelle De La Isla, Mayor of the City of Topeka, Kansas, do hereby proclaim October 24, 2019 as World Polio Day in Topeka, Kansas, and encourage all citizens to join myself and Rotary International in the fight for a polio-free world. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Really outstanding. We greatly appreciate it. We also want to thank Vince. Vince, raise your hands. Anyway, Vince helped coordinate getting this done. We greatly appreciate that proclamation. So today is World Polio Day. We celebrate the incredible progress we made, but we have work remaining to do. In the early 1900s, polio infected the entire world. Polio is primarily spread through infected feces. Polio remains in effect around the world due to sewage handling and contaminated water processes. Pure numbers are a little hard to estimate, but as recently as 1980, there were 350,000 cases of paralysis around the world every year. About 10 times that number were infected and fell ill, and about 5% of the total number died. So the human costs of polio are astronomically bad. Since Rotary took on polio in the Philippines in 1979 and then pumped it up on steroids in 1985 with Polio Plus, success has followed success. Today, only Nigeria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan have wild polio. So far this year, there have only been 85 cases of wild polio in the world. But the task remaining before us is immense. The remaining pockets of polio are in isolated, poor areas, in war zones, and are in areas that are controlled by men or by sects that oppose the distribution of the vaccine. People attempting to get into these remote backwater areas have been murdered. We are this close. Negotiations for peace-related work, negotiations to allow the distribution of vaccine by women, offers to provide additional health care on top of polio vaccines have the best chances to get the vaccine to the mouths of children who have never had it. Polio remains active in sewage and water for an extended time. A recent map of Pakistan showed 50% of the country has active polio in its sewage. Until we end polio forever, every child, every adult is at risk. Polio does jump borders with ease due to the ease of international travel. We cannot let up. There are many heroes in this effort, some in this room. We appreciate everyone, but Bill and Melinda Gates certainly deserve special recognition for their more than $4 billion in matching funds to this point. It costs $3 to immunize a child against polio. It costs $100 million a year to conduct polio surveillance worldwide, to monitor sewage and water to see where renewed outbreaks are most likely to recur. It takes 3 years of no polio cases and no wild virus in the sewage and water supplies to declare a country polio-free. We are this close. Today we're going to celebrate polio, and let's begin. No, we're going to celebrate the eradication of polio. We're going to begin with Jim Liker, our own Rotarian. Jim was born and raised in Topeka, graduated from Hayden High, bachelor's from Washburn University, master's from Wichita State. He and his wife Maureen enjoyed 3 adult children, 7 grandkids, and 2 great-grandchildren. Jim has been an entrepreneur, worked for the state government, been in the corporate banking industry. All these prepared him to assume the leadership role here at Cappers in 1992. He has extensive experience in almost everything you can imagine. We'll highlight again, he's been a Topeka Rotarian since 1992, a friend of mine. We welcome Jim Liker to speak about the origins of the Capper Foundation and the future of this organization going into its 100th anniversary next year. I want to thank you, Roger. I want to acknowledge, give credit where credit's due. Our staff, who again helped put together, worked with Roger on today's getting this all organized, as well as some of the presentation that you're going to see. Matt Kelly is on our staff as a marketing specialist, and Lacey Kinder is also on our staff as a marketing specialist. They do a great job getting the word out. We are truly delighted that you're here at the Capper Foundation on World Polio Day. I was driving between meetings this morning and was listening on the radio. Today also, Representative Elijah Cummings lies in state at the U.S. Capitol. Regardless of your politics, I was listening to some of the comments some of the congressional leaders were saying about him, and they described him as strong, kind, caring, and honorable. And they said he fought hard for the causes he believed in. As I heard those remarks as I was driving, I thought about Arthur Capper, and I also thought about our staff and our volunteers and our donors. I also thought about Rotary and the fellow Rotarians, my fellow Rotarians, because there's certainly a common thread through all of that. It certainly fits the bill of all of us and all the great work that's been done in terms of being strong, kind, caring, and honorable, but also around really fighting hard for causes that you believe in. And we think about polio and all the efforts that have been. Actually, Capper Foundation was started by Arthur Capper, serving, basically he saw what a lot of people saw back in 1920. And we'll go through some of the history here in a bit, but polio was actually first identified in the late 1890s or so. But in 1920, think about 1920, and the insurance essentially did not exist, so you were on your own. If you had polio or influenza or anything else, and all of that, and all that goes with that, there wasn't much there was some medical care, but certainly not the sophistication that we had today. So it was a pretty big deal. So Arthur Capper basically said, I'm going to do something. Nobody knew what caused polio. Nobody knew quite what to do about it. Nobody knew, certainly there was no cure for it. There still isn't, but there's prevention through vaccinations, obviously. So, but he decided to do something. So we'll talk about that and go through some of the history here. Some of this Roger covered. So as we were putting together, again, some of the research on polio, it's obviously infectious disease and potentially fatal. It can be, I think, and you'll hear in some of the presentations today, I'm sure, you can have polio and you may not know it actually because it doesn't show symptoms in some cases, or it can also invade the nervous system and cause all kinds of serious issues, paralysis of your legs and your diaphragm and breathing and all of that sort of thing. Mainly affects children under 5. It's incurable, but it is obviously the vaccinations will keep it from spreading and keep it preventable. Roger mentioned again, just so we all know what we're talking about, less than 1% of the cases. But again, if you're 1%, it's obviously pretty serious and all the impact that has as well. And you think 1%, but again, if you look at the population of the cities and towns in the nation, that adds up to a lot of people, and not just numbers, because we look at the numbers, but it's people's lives and how it affects their lives, obviously, in everyday living. Some of the things that I talked about, weakness of the muscles and neck, and also paralysis, and obviously very serious stuff. The fear of polio, I was reading this in one of the articles, this lady actually wrote an article, she said, if polio actually had a reign of terror, I never really thought about it like that, but yet one of our board members, Jay Ives, who's the co-owner of the Blind Tiger, he remembers playing with a couple of kids growing up in Topeka, and they both had polio, or got polio, and his mother, she said she was just the parents were just fear-struck, if you might imagine, because again, didn't know how you got it, or quite what to do about it, or how to avoid it if you could. So actually, Jay remembers him playing with a couple kids one day, and the next day his parents are sending him over to live with the grandparents in another part of town, because again, they weren't quite sure how you got it. So, but again, just the reign of terror that it really did cause throughout the nation, literally for decades and decades. Here in 1894, again, Roger mentioned that was first identified in the United States in Vermont, 18 deaths and 132 cases of permanent paralysis. So again, you can see that obviously why there would be so much fear and anxiety over it. In 1905, it was discovered that it was contagious. They didn't quite know how or why, but they discovered that it was. So there were actually signs posted in a lot of places, a lot of quarantines, those kinds of things. People were isolated. Some of the children, I think even in the recent Rotary magazine, a lady talking about her parents having to visit through a window while she was at the hospital, I believe it was, and because they, again, trying to keep people quarantined so it didn't spread any further. 1910, take a look at that. The polio virus was identified and investigation to a vaccine, but take a look at that. Even in Kansas, 198 cases were identified. In Pennsylvania, 1,000 cases. So it really did spread very fast throughout the nation and again throughout the world. But and then back then it literally was considered infantile paralysis because that's how it affected people for the most part. If you could have mild symptoms or not at all, but you could also, obviously, the paralysis was some was temporary, but much of it was lifelong and had lifelong effects. Again, just to put it in context of what was happening in the nation at the time, troops were returning from World War I. Women's right to vote was ratified in 1920 as we go forward. The radio stations were broadcasting, the fireside chats and all those kinds of things were starting to happen. And then Arthur Capper on Christmas Day in 1920, actually they took toys and candies out to, he was part of a Goodfellows Club in Topeka. They took toys and candy out to poor areas of town to give out Christmas gifts. And they saw kids with infantile paralysis. They saw kids with polio that couldn't get to the car very fast. And he and Con Van Atta was his composing room foreman at the newspaper. That's where he made his money. He was also a politician. He was a U.S. senator representing Kansas, a governor, and then founded the Capper Foundation for Crippled Children back then. But it started as a Capper Fund, so it literally said we got to do more for the kids. And rather than just taking toys and candy, we got to get these kids medical surgeries, treatment, rehabilitation, wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, leg braces, those kinds of medical services that would at least try to help them as best they could at the time. There was still, again, there was no cure for a long time. But again, so that's how we actually started as a Capper Fund to pay for the services. We continue to this day. We'll be, as Roger mentioned and Joni mentioned, we'll be 100 years old next year, so providing lots of services to lots of people for years and hopefully for years to come. 1921, President Roosevelt was, there's some controversy about this, but most historians think it was polio. His legs were permanently paralyzed, and back then they kept that hidden from the public as much as possible, but it was still there, and I think some of the newer representation showed that. And, again, the iron lung, because it did affect people with the diaphragm, and again, think about that being a child, or think about that even being an adult, being an iron lung to breathe, because your chest muscles could not, your diaphragm was not able to do so because of the paralysis. So think about that as a child and being isolated and yet in a room with nurses and iron lungs to breathe. But yet, on the other hand, you were able to breathe and live, even though it was obviously pretty dramatic to take a look at and to experience, obviously. In 1947, actually, the Topeka Orphans Home went under, basically. It was at 3rd and Fillmore at the time. Capper actually bought the property and turned it into the Capper Foundation Center. It was the first comprehensive rehabilitation center, easy for me to say, right? The first rehabilitation center for children in the Topeka area, and continued to expand. In 1952, again, 57. Look at those numbers, 57,000 people. So it ebbed and flowed, but certainly certain years it surged. In 52, it was Salk was beginning the early tests, but look at those numbers of folks that were affected by polio. Polio results were announced in 55, and mass vaccinations began, and the world started to change. And actually, some of the readings and things that we've done says that, while people were getting vaccinations, more young people started getting more vaccinations after this guy got hit. So, nice to see celebrities use it for good. 79, that Roger mentioned, again, thankfully Rotary International really started its big fight to again, try to eradicate it off the face of the earth, and obviously made great efforts. And you've heard a lot about that. You have some brochures and things on your. And then the big push in '85 with Polio Plus and helping the water supply and all those kinds of things, clean things up and get into more villages and more countries. And again, what a great effort. Since '88, again, decreased by 99%. Cases are extremely rare, but they still do exist, and I think as Roger and Joni and others will tell you, as long as one case exists, it could spread. It is contagious, and it could we could have a huge surge again. So obviously, we want to do everything we can to fight, keep fighting, and end polio forever. Today, again, Roger mentioned this, so I'll kind of move through it quickly. Our mission is to build abilities and empower people of all ages living with disabilities. And again, we started basically working with, Arthur Capper started funding services for children. Then at 3rd and Fillmore, we started providing direct services for children with polio and other infantile paralysis and other types of medical issues, disability issues. We've since expanded to, we serve children right out of the neonatal unit, and get referrals every day actually for children, teens, and adults. So the whole gamut, and we've expanded our services to the whole range of services for all kinds of disabilities. I think I just said that actually. Person served, people say, well, tell me about the folks that you see at Capper and work with at Capper. Some of the folks that we see have physical disabilities, some have intellectual disabilities, some have mental health issues, and some have behavioral issues. And some of those are mild, some of those are moderate, and some of those are very severe. Some individuals have all of these situations or issues at the same time. So again, that's the population that we serve. Been doing it a long time and will continue. Our impact has been tremendous, just like Rotary's impact, but our impact has been tremendous. A lot of families have literally moved to Topeka, Kansas, so their children and their family members could get services here. Pediatric therapy services, mobility and muscle development with physical therapy, occupational therapy, fine motor skills, and daily tasks, again, buttoning buttons, things that we all take, a lot of us take for granted. Being able to, comb your hair and use the scissors and button your buttons and zip your zippers and use all those kinds of things. Again, with certain disabilities, we work with folks to be able to do that. Speech language services, again, pretty important to be able to communicate, whether it's by voice or by a voice machine or by iPads and things like that. Pediatric service, again, we work with a lot of kids for feeding services, swallowing, those kinds of things. Again, a lot of referrals for that as well. Behavior support, again, a lot of behavior support needs have increased tremendously. Autism and other issues around behavioral issues at all ages. So we've expanded our services in that area. Our therapist works with about 20 families each week and then continues to set goals and work with them. Adaptive recreation of all sorts. We've got some really cool programs going with I Can Bike and I Can Swim, and teaching kids to ride a bike in a week, kids with disabilities, and also swim and be comfortable in the water. A lot of adult services, day services where people feel comfortable and safe and can be productive as well. So both here and elsewhere. We have a lot of adult services. We'll put some of this information, we put it in a packet that we'll send with you, since I'm covering this pretty quickly because of time restraints. But we have an auto detail shop, a woodworking shop, a gift shop, business support center, all those kinds of things where adults with disabilities work and get paid and feel good about it and alongside their friends. A number of community employment opportunities for our adults. We support them working at Ramada Inn and Reese's and Walmart and Dillon's and places like that with supports and services. Some of our locations, our main campus is here in Topeka. We also have operations in Ark City, El Dorado, and Winfield, Kansas. 63 cities and 23 counties, about 282 staff. Lots of volunteers, thank you. A lot of Rotary pictures are up around here, Rotarian. There's one right over here with the Rotary group, and they've helped fund projects for us over lots of years donated iPads. iPad is a game changer in speech therapy. So we needed some, and they helped us out with that particular year. So we also have other Rotary members' pictures up and around the hallways because they volunteer here and serve on committees and things. About 1,700 people served, and almost 1 million hours of service. You can see the breakdown on the income, and again, most fees and contracts, but a lot of it we do rely on charitable support. Our budget is $13 million a year, and we do about $2.7 million in non-reimbursed care, so that's just due to the generosity of the people. Most of our services don't pay for themselves, and so we have a lot of scholarship assistance that people receive here because they need it. Charity Navigator, we're really proud of that. 7 years in a row, we got the highest 4-star rating. That puts us at the top 6% of charities nationwide, which we're pretty proud of. And 92% of the expenditures go directly to programs and services, and only 8% go to administration and fundraising. We put those numbers up against anybody anywhere. Thankfully that we're able to do that. Our vision that is each person is valued and enjoys access, independence, and opportunities to advance their hopes and dreams. So you think about it, if you value people, you know, you're going to do what it takes, you're going to raise the money, you're going to provide the services, all the things that you need to do to help them be as independent as possible and empower them as much as possible. We're celebrating our 100 years next year, so we'll be getting the word out about that even more. We have a real short video, just takes a couple minutes, and then we'll move on to the couple other presentations. By the way, Emily McGee is in this, and Chris and Emily decided to go take a nice trip, so they couldn't be here, but they sent their regards.
Imagine your child getting an unexpected diagnosis. You would do everything that you can to make sure that your child is successful. We started coming to Capper when Ethan was 7 months old after he survived a stroke shortly after delivery. We didn't know what to expect. Is Ethan going to cooperate? Is he going to scream for an hour? He's 7 months old. We had to start from ground zero. We were teaching him how to play with toys. After that first session, the nerves dissipated, and it's just been absolutely incredible.
We serve people of all ages and all kinds of disabilities, people that need supports and services to be the best they can be.
And we need support from our community to really make sure that we're able to support every child that needs our services.
Donations make a huge difference, and we certainly need the community support to help make good things happen. Donors that give to Capper Foundation can feel good about giving. The reason is their money's helping people advance their hopes and dreams.
Capper is helping kids, teens, and adults, which then indirectly is really benefiting the community as a whole.
We have a waiting list of an average of about 200 children. Success looks like people receiving services, pediatric therapies, adult education for employment training, and growing the endowment for the long-term future of the organization.
Being here has given Ethan independence. It's taught him he can do anything that he sets his mind to. Our experience with Capper has been nothing short of amazing. We have seen major successes since the first time we came in. Donors would benefit from knowing that they are giving individuals a place to call home. Sometimes it scares me to be. It's given us hope.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, well, thank you, Jim, and the entire Cappers team. Our next up is our own Topeka Rotarian Mike Hall. Mike's a longtime club member. He's retired from a great career in the newsroom at the Topeka Capital Journal. You may have seen him last night on KSNT at 5 p.m. talking about his personal polio story, and he's going to share it again with us today. Thank you, Mike.
Well, I'll have to make this short and sweet because you've gotten a lot of information to absorb here. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why I take this fight against polio so personally, because I suffered from polio as a child. In the summer of 1952, I came down with a malady. My parents thought it was the flu, so they gave me some water and some aspirin, and I couldn't swallow. It came back out through my nose, and they realized then something more serious was going on. So I was in the hospital, and I'm glad that Jim included that photo of the iron lung, because that's one of the strongest memories I have from being 7 years old in a hospital with polio. The iron lung just scared the dickens out of me. It looked like a coffin with your head sticking out, you know, and it was just an awful thing. I don't know exactly why I am the way I am today. I'm virtually free of any lasting effect, with one exception. I do still have a little trouble swallowing, and some of you, if you've eaten with me at Thursday, you may notice I'm the one who always last to finish eating, because I have to take small bites and chew carefully. But otherwise, you know, I couldn't believe it when Uncle Sam said in 1968, "You're healthy, we're going to put you in the Army." I was never any good at sports because I didn't have the stamina that other kids did, and getting through basic training was a real ordeal for me. But overall, it was a good experience for me. I came out healthier and more confident, I think. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about why. And Roger, can you come up first for a second? I give to Rotary Polio Plus every once in a while. I haven't done it lately, so I'm giving you a check for today.
Thank you, Mike, so very, very much. Very generous. We are going to conclude the meeting in a few minutes with an appeal, so you can prepare briefly. But next up, we welcome Larry Lunsford. Larry is from Missouri, but we forgive him. He is the Chief Financial Officer of Bernstein Ryan Advertising, Kansas City, Missouri. He's been a member of the Kansas City Plaza Rotary Club for 28 years, was District Governor 0102. He's currently a Rotary International Director, position, you know, similar in that was 2013, 2015, International Director. Currently as a personal aide to the Rotary International President Mark Maloney. Please welcome for a few words, Larry Lunsford.
I heard that comment about voting on Kansas and Missouri. And I resemble that remark, right? It's really a pleasure to be invited by Joan and by Roger to hopefully add just very briefly to the context and the experience of the day that we have here in front of us. It's really a pleasure to be with you at this World Polio Day event. You're probably aware this is one of probably thousands of these same kinds of events happening throughout our Rotary world. The World Polio Day was established by RI about a decade ago to commemorate the birth of Jonah's song. And it has really continued to evolve to that place where here we are today, and I understand there'll be other Topeka Rotarians in this same facility this evening, spreading the news of the great work that Rotary has done. So as the aide to the 2019-2020 RI President, I bring you greetings today from Mark Maloney, our Rotary International President. As we meet here today in Topeka, President Mark is currently in Evanston, looking after your own Larry Dimmitt at the October meeting of the Board of Directors of Rotary International in Evanston. In addition, right now, the Rotary International Polio Plus Committee is holding its meetings in Evanston, and the trustees of our Rotary Foundation are just arriving in Evanston today to begin their meetings. And so this evening, along with an event that will be here with one of the other Topeka clubs, this evening starting at 5:45 p.m., there will be a very large live streaming event in Evanston. For the first time, our World Polio Day efforts will be screened in 9 regions around the world in multiple time zones and languages, so that every single Rotary member and other champions of our efforts can view the program. Now, Rotarians are great at using acronyms, and earlier this decade, the acronym PAIN was used to describe the remaining countries in the world where polio still existed earlier this decade: Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, and Nigeria. In March 2014, after more than 3 years without a case of the wild polio virus, India was officially declared polio-free by the World Health Organization. This achievement made the Southeast Asia region the 4th region of the world to be certified as polio-free, after the Americas in 1994, the Western Pacific in 2000, and the European region in 2002. Today, Nigeria has now gone more than 3 years without a case of the wild polio virus, which means that very soon, friends, the entire WHO African region could soon be certified polio-free. The members of the Rotary Club of Topeka, Kansas should be very proud of all the hard work you've performed and decades-long commitment you've kept. If you'd like to help, as you've already heard, the opportunity today will come to make a donation. All the donations, as you know, are matched 2-to-1 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so this $20 bill becomes $60, which pays for the virus, the vaccine, for 100 children. And due to our efforts, when there are no more cases in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the world can continue then to use these resources to other pressing matters. In the early 1950s, when Jonas Salk was asked who owns the patent on the polio vaccine, he replied, "The people," and asked his interviewer, "Would you patent the sun?" I think we can all agree that his comparison was no exaggeration. The polio vaccine is nothing less than the gift of life. And thanks to the Global Polio Eradication Initiative and the leadership of Rotary International, that vaccine has been delivered to billions of people. Let's finish the task. Thank you.
This is it. Actually handed a gift over. Thank you, Larry, so very, very much. Next up, Jason Lieb has been a Rotarian since 2006, served as president of the Lenexa Rotary Club in 09 and 10, assistant district governor 12 through 16, and is our current district governor. Jason and his partners recently sold their technology consulting company to High Touch Technologies of Wichita, where he's now employed. He and other partners also own a microbrewery in downtown Shawnee, Kansas, and Jason's Pints for Polio campaign is doing well all across the district. Jason, thank you for a couple of words.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you again to Joni and Rogers for inviting me up here today. I think the only thing harder than eradicating a disease like polio is telling a district governor they have 5 minutes to speak, but I think I can do that, so I think we can finish eradicating polio. As we enter our 4th decade in the fight to eliminate this terrible disease, our progress is real and noteworthy. While the first vaccination efforts with Rotary began in the late 70s, as we've discussed, it became a strategic focus for all of Rotary in the mid-80s, when it was endemic in 125 countries and more than 350,000 cases per year. As Larry mentioned, we now have only 2 endemic countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the entire continent of Africa expected to be certified polio-free in the coming year. It's often noted that polio will be the only second human disease to be eradicated from the earth following smallpox, but that is true only in a sense. In fact, there are 3 strains of polio. Type 2 has already been eradicated, and today on World Polio Day, Rotary and its Global Polio Eradication Initiative partners announced that wild polio virus type 3 has also been eradicated worldwide. Vaccines do work. I've also been asked many times, with only 2 endemic countries, why do we need to continue to raise funds at the same pace we have in the past? In this interconnected world, the spread of the disease is only a plane ride away. We must still vaccinate children in scores of countries to prevent a return. And that's why we cannot and will not give up the fight against polio until we've ensured that no child will ever again be afflicted by this crippling and sometimes deadly disease. I do have a quick note from Michael McGovern, the chair of the Rotary National's Polio Plus Committee, that I will read to you. The eradication of wild poliovirus type 3 is a critical step in Rotary's fight to eradicate polio. Even as we are addressing major challenges in Pakistan and Afghanistan, we continue to make historic progress that shows us that eradication is possible. Today is World Polio Day, a time to reflect on our efforts, how far we've come, and the work that still needs to be done to fulfill our promise of a polio-free world. It's important that we remain optimistic and harness the momentum of this good news as we tackle the remaining challenges in the global effort to end polio. Thank you.
We really appreciate Larry and Jason coming to our club on this day when there are dozens and dozens of clubs that could be at. I know they're going to be at several, but we're a few of the several, so thank you. All right, you've heard it now. We're that close. It's time for the Topeka Rotary Club to do it again. We need every Rotarian to make a polio gift. Every gift will be matched by the Gates Foundation, $2 to 1. So here's how to donate. You want to pop this up for me?
I'll get it.
Yeah. All right, we'll skip that one. If you look at the sheet on your table, we'll start with number 2. There's 3 ways to donate. Number 2 is write a check right now and leave it with Joni or me or someone else in the club. Number 2, same way. You can bring a check to the next meeting, or the next meeting, or the next meeting, or you can mail it in to the address provided right there on your piece of paper. All right. The second way to do it is here on the wall. See right here? Where's my amount? You donate? Donate? Click donate. Roll down, skip that, but donate. Skip that one. Skip those. And end polio forever. Donate. Abracadabra. It worked this morning. It's just spinning, so we got a little connectivity thing, but let it run. You fill in the blanks, you donate. It's that easy.
It's
right? Hey, all right. It really is that easy. I know most of you are polio donors. Right here, polio fund. Click polio fund, and just keep going. All right, I'm not going to fight that. I don't care. All right. That's how you do it. Here's the third way. C, credit card. Russ, where are you? Deb, you're here. Do you have a card too? All right. Russ and Deb, you can swipe your credit card before you leave today. All right. Glad to do it. And finally, we're going to ask right now. We're going to have a reverse auction for polio. I'm going to name numbers starting high, and when you hear a number that you feel willing to give at, just raise your hand. Okay? It's going to be on the honor system. You make your donation anytime you want, but just make the commitment by raising your hand when you hear a number that you're ready to support. So let's start. Who'll give $1 million? All right, 100,000. Okay, 10,000. We have a 10,000 from Lon Lewis. Just tally. Just give me 10,000. Give me 1. I just want to tally this up as we go. And when we're done, we'll tell you what we just raised today. Because 10,000 just became 30,000.
Yeah.
Wow. All right? All right. Who's good for 5? Is there 5,000? How about 1,000? I'm in. 1, 2, 3. Any other 1,000s? All right. How about 500? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 500s. 8. 8. Thank you, David. How about 250? 1, 2. Thank you. 250. How about $100? Who's good for 100? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18 $100 donors. Thank you. 50. 1 for 50, thank you. Anyone else? And 25. Final number, that's the lowest I'm going. 25, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, Stan, can you add that up real quick? All right. $19,475 times 3, so rounded up to 20, folks, that's $60,000 for polio. The Topeka Rotary Club strikes again. Thank you, everyone. That's remarkable. Joni's coming up, and as she does, I'm going to say thank you to Matt, Lacey, and Jim, and all the Capper Foundation team for putting this together. And give yourselves one more round of applause.
It's not very often that I become speechless, but your generosity this afternoon has made me speechless. So with that, I will ask the speakers at the end of the meeting to come up and sign our book that we will donate to Ross Elementary School. And then, instead of the 4-way test, I thought we should sing Happy Birthday to Jonas Salk.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jonas. Happy birthday to you.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
One